Hi everyone and welcome to today's Biology Daily Booster. This is number 14 in our Paper 2 series and it is advanced information listed topics for both the higher and the foundation biology students. We're going to delve into the world of disease today. So to start us off, 3 key definitions we need to know. Health is being free from disease, fitness, your ability to carry out an activity, and disease is just a condition caused by any part of your body that's not functioning properly. So make sure you understand those 3 terms first of all, because they are going to be kind of key to understanding this particular part of B6. As far as diseases go, we're going to group them into 2 main categories: communicable diseases and non-communicable diseases. Communicable ones can spread between organisms. So these are the ones that tend to be caused by microorganisms, and any of those microorganisms causing disease is called a pathogen. So those pathogens are what spread from person to person or organism to organism and therefore spread that disease. If we look at the 4 types of pathogen, we need to remember fungi, bacteria, virus, protozoa. You need to know an example of an animal and a plant disease for each of them. So for the fungus, animal disease is athlete's foot, plant disease, powdery mildew. Bacteria, animal disease tuberculosis or TB, plant disease, crown gall disease. For viruses, we've got influenza for animals and tobacco mosaic virus for plants. And finally our protozoal diseases, then animals is malaria and plant coffee flow necrosis. We are going to have a brief look at each of these through our booster today. What we do as scientists studying diseases then, is one of the key areas of our focus, is we study what we refer to as the incidence of disease. So this is what we were doing throughout the pandemic. We were looking at the incidence of COVID-19. And quite simply what we mean by that is we're looking at the rate at which new cases are occurring in that population over a certain period of time. So all of those lovely graphs that Boris used to chuck on the TV every night in his little briefings showing a number of new cases, that was our incidence of COVID-19. Category number 2, the non-communicable diseases, these ones do not spread between organisms. So they're caused by different things, not usually microorganisms here. First cause, poor diet. Great example, scurvy, caused by a lack of vitamin C there. Obviously, this is something that we don't tend to suffer with too badly in modern times. Go back to when we used to do many long voyages on the seas in times of pirates, etc. Lots of scurvy. Generally unpleasant, wounds open up, etc. Scar tissue breaks down, generally unpleasant. Obesity, that's going to lead to things like cardiovascular disease and diabetes. We'll look at those in more detail later. Genetic disorders such as cystic fibrosis, Huntington's disease, etc. And then just part of your body that's not operating as it should do. Best example there, cancer, where your body cells are just dividing in an uncontrollable fashion. What we do need to bear in mind is even though communicable diseases and non-communicable diseases have their own separate causes, some of these conditions are actually linked. So if we think about cervical cancer, for example, then as we said, cancers don't spread from person to person. So if you've got, obviously, cancer and you go and touch someone else, they're not going to catch your cancer. However, what we know with cervical cancer is it's caused by a virus. Most of those cases are caused by this HPV, human papillomavirus. Another one that we see these links is HIV, which causes AIDS. But because AIDS weakens the immune system, that means you're then more likely to get infections from other pathogens like TB. So they are separate and yet they are linked. Let's consider how things spread. In all honesty, I'm expecting this part of our B6 work to be what we are all experts in. If you are not an expert or at least competent in answering questions on how diseases spread and how we can stop the spread of diseases, after spending the past 2.5 years living through a pandemic, what on earth were you doing? So let's go with the basics. How does it spread first of all? Firstly, we can get infections through cuts in the skin, we've broken that physical barrier, through your digestive system, eating stuff that's contaminated, respiratory system, breathing things in, reproductive system, unprotected sex usually. One of the key methods of this infection is what we refer to as droplet infection. So when we're talking about droplet infection, this is where when you cough or sneeze, then there's these tiny little droplets of mucus that basically emerge at high speed from your mouth and nose. In that mucus can be pathogens. So anyone who happens to inhale those tiny little droplets could very well catch the disease. So to give you an idea of why it's important to cover your mouth and nose when you sneeze, that is someone sneezing. That little white cloud all around there, that is the mucus containing pathogens spraying out in the general area. Imagine just standing talking to that person. Face full of pathogens. Very unpleasant. In terms of our plants, then this tends to be spread through soil and water. We also have some other routes, so vectors can spread diseases to plants. In vectors we mean things like insects. There can be direct contact of sap, which is going to happen potentially due to us using agricultural tools on more than one plant at a time. And there can be airborne means, such as the fungal spores being carried on the wind. It's not a case of, if you are around someone who's coughing and spluttering pathogen all over the place, the first time you inhale that pathogen, you do not get ill immediately. It's not a case of pathogen enters the body, illness then follows instantly. We have this time called the incubation period, which is the time from your point of infection to actually feeling ill. And during that time, that's when the pathogens are going to be reproducing. And as those pathogens grow, they cause damage to the cells, some may be releasing toxins, and then we feel the symptoms. We need to note the difference in how our two key types of pathogens are going to be reproducing. So bacteria, first of all, here they are. They replicate through binary fission, which is just mitosis. What we see, one cell is going to divide into two, 2 becomes 4, 4 becomes 8, 8 becomes 16, etc. As a result of that, what we have is a type of growth called exponential growth, which is this little graph here. Small population gets very big very quick, is what that tells us. The viruses replicate in a different way, because what they're doing is having to take over the host cells. They can't replicate themselves. They need to actually invade a host cell and take over the machinery to replicate virus particles inside that cell. So what we see is our little virus here is going to attach onto our host cell. It then inserts its genetic material into the host cell, takes it over, and the host cell then makes lots of virus particles. Eventually they get to the point where there's so many of them, they then burst out of the cell, and then off they go to infect new ones. So how do we prevent these diseases spreading? A lot of this is just common sense after a pandemic. Cover your mouth and nose when coughing and sneezing. Don't touch infected things. You know, if someone's got Ebola, don't go and like poke the bloody bits. It's not a great idea. If we're talking about sexually transmitted, use protection. Don't share needles if you happen to need needles for anything. Wash your hands. Cook food properly. Don't go and poke animals and let them bite you, etc. Just quite straightforward stuff, in all honesty. If we think about farmers potentially identifying diseases, then if it's a more serious disease, what they tend to do is they're going to remove the diseased material. This usually involves killing whatever it is and then burning it. So yes, that does mean animals as well, and we've seen that through the foot and mouth outbreak a few years ago, where large numbers of herds were actually culled and the corpses were then burnt to try to stop it spreading elsewhere. Quick overview of these different diseases then. You don't need to recall all these facts, but just be aware of some of the kind of key features, if you like. So, athlete's foot, caused by a fungus, likes warm, humid conditions, and gives you that sort of itchy, flaky, cracked red skin. You're going to spread it through contact, both direct and indirect. Because it's a fungus, we treat it with an antifungal cream. Food poisoning is going to be our bacterial example, so a range of different bacteria cause food poisoning, Campylobacter, Salmonella, E. coli, etc. Now, these ones can survive both refrigeration and freezing. The only way to kill them is by cooking food thoroughly. Generally not pleasant to get food poisoning, usually ends up with diarrhea and vomiting, and if you're really unlucky, explosive versions, both ends at once, really unpleasant. And if it's incredibly serious and untreated, it can lead to death. Treatment for this one tends to be just fluids until you recover and it passes through your system. Sexually transmitted infections, these can be either bacterial or viral, obviously spread through unprotected sex. So in terms of protection against them, choices: avoid sexual intercourse altogether, or use some kind of barrier method of protection, because just taking the pill is going to do absolutely nothing for a sexually transmitted infection. You need to have that barrier of something like a condom here to work. Here's 4 lovely examples. Chlamydia and gonorrhea are bacterial, so they're treated with antibiotics. Herpes and HIV are viral, and you'll notice there is no cure for either of those viral infections. So what we know is there's no cure for them, but with HIV we do have antiretroviral drugs which you can take, which minimises the impact, and obviously you have to take those for the rest of your life. In terms of HIV, this is a tricky little virus, because what it actually does is it gets inside your white blood cells and reproduces inside those. So it's going to prevent the white blood cells attacking it, because it's hiding inside the white blood cells, and it's also going to destroy them as the virus particles then emerge. So it's kind of a double whammy on your immune system. That means that the person is going to be way more susceptible to common infections. The final stage of HIV infection is AIDS, and that's where your body can no longer fight off these life-threatening different conditions. So you end up getting a range of infections, things like pneumonia, etc., and that's the most likely cause of death there. Quick overview of our plants as well, because we can't forget plants get diseases too. In terms of the viral disease, that's tobacco mosaic virus. Causes damage to the leaves, so discolouring, mottling, etc., and it's going to stunt the plant's growth because the leaves are not as they should be. Restricts the amount of light taken in by the chloroplasts, reducing photosynthesis. How do we sort of remove the issue of it? Well, we remove infected plants, wash equipment, and try to plant resistant crops the following year if you've had an infection. Bacterial infection in our plants is crown gall disease. Now, this one tends to enter through a wound, and as a result, it then creates this growth on the plant called a gall. If that gall encircles the whole stem or trunk, it can stop sap flowing. How do we prevent it? Well, we destroy the infected plants, and we avoid planting susceptible ones in that same area for a couple of years to let the bacterium die off in that area. Fungal disease is powdery mildew. This causes little white powdery spots on the leaves. Now, what we find to prevent the spread here is we're going to spray it with a fungicide. Remember, fungicides kills fungi. If there are bits you want to delve into in more detail, you can use the video on the main part of the channel, your revision guides, your classwork notes. Have a little look at some of the exam papers to see the style of questions that come up here. And of course, don't forget to join us again tomorrow for our next Daily Booster.